Great, okay. I'd like to call the Community Services Subcommittee meeting to order. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? Seeing none. Item 3 is delegations. We have no delegations scheduled. And item 4.1 is Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program Transit Funding Update. Mr. Mosley, would you like to speak to that?
Absolutely, thank you. And through the chair, I decided to provide an update. As most of you know, a lot of the transit funding projects over the last 2.5, 3 years have come from the ISIP program, which is a joint effort through the feds, through the province, and through the municipality, which we can use provincial gas tax for our share. I've listed in the report there basically where we're at now. And as you can see, we've had quite a few projects in the last couple of years. For the first intake, which was 3 years of intake out of the 10, there's 3 left, which is 2 more conventional buses and 1 more mobility bus, which is the funded projects for this year. There's also the shelter project for this year as well, which is just starting now. They've just actually started to break ground. Beyond that, the rest of the report kind of deals with what my thoughts are as far as funding for transit for the remaining 10 years, which is another 7, because we still have some funding opportunities that we've been approved for as far as financial. So they've actually, back in June, they've the ISIP or the MTO, they have decided to do another intake, which means that now at this point, between now and 2024, we can apply for additional projects. And I've kind of taken the approach that for the remaining 7 years, I'm starting to work on, and I did attach the spreadsheet for you to see what type of projects I'd like to pursue going for the next 7 years, and start that application process, because it needs to go through the different levels of government. It starts with the province first. They make their approvals, then they forward it on to Infrastructure Canada for their final approval, and then they either have more questions or they approve the project, or whatever case that they want to do. So at this point, I've listed quite a few different projects for the next 7 years, and they include electric vehicles. They include electronic fare collection, which I'm starting to look at now. A good chunk of this is infrastructure and facility. If anyone's been around to the transit garage before, or the office, we're in need of some pretty serious upgrades, from a bus wash system to garage interior, as far as the hoists go that lift the buses up when we do service. A lot of these are starting to become very costly to maintain. So I'm going to do some funding initiatives there as well, as far as the office upgrade. I'm looking at ZEB buses, so zero emission buses, starting in the next few years. In that, the ISIP funding allows us for consultants to go forward with electric buses, which I'm really excited about. There needs to be some feasibility studies. It's of course not as simple as just plugging a bus into a wall. There's a lot of infrastructure that is required for this. And I'm on actually several committees through Metrolinx, through CUDA, through Opta. We're all starting to look at how we, what's the starting point for electric buses. So that's this type of funding will also help that, as far as consultants go. So it's kind of a starting point. I'm starting to get some idea of prices for all these type of projects, as far as what I've listed on the Excel sheets, just kind of a starting point as far as what I think, or from what I've heard, ballpark for financial. And ideally, the good thing about this project is it doesn't cost local taxpayers anything, because our contribution is through provincial gas tax. So all these are completely funded, and it doesn't hurt or the bottom line as far as the local taxes go. So as I go through this, I'll provide updates subcommittee as we go, let you know how we are as far as what points are we at, if something's going to change or whatever the case may be. So it's just kind of a starting point, but applications usually take a while. Applications also take a while to get approved. So that's why it's something that I'm looking at right now to start the ball rolling on some of these things.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mosley. Are there any questions? Councillor Anderson, and then Councillor Clifford and Councillor Brewer.
Yes, I've been out to the bus terminal garage, I guess you would call it, and the office. I agree about the office needing an update. And now my understanding with is that 15 buses, once they're in that garage at night, that it's so tight you can't even have bike racks on the front of the buses. So are part of the plans to expand and make that garage bigger? And my second part of the question is, are electric buses the same length?
Yes, through the chair, there is a plan in the next 7 years to expand the storage presently, because you're correct, Councillor Henderson. It's we can just get 15 buses in there. The infrastructure for electrification, there's a lot of equipment. There's charging stations. There's a big transformer that needs to be placed there to charge these new units. Just based on that alone, if I do go with zero emission buses, in the next few years, I'm going to need a bigger storage area for all this equipment. The buses size are 40 footers, just like the buses that we use now. They're the same size. But yes, in my plans, expansion of the storage facility is on that list, because I'm going to need to fit all this equipment, hopefully in the future.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, the question I have goes along with Councillor Henderson. Is there, and we talked about this for a long time, having smaller buses? Like, it seems to me, even if they're electric or diesel, we have these buses, and as we have on demand, is it possible to have smaller buses, or are you convinced we have to have the same 40-foot buses forever?
Through the chair, I mean, you'll see bigger centers that will have various size buses. The challenge for a small system like what we have is overhead and storage of parts. 30-foot buses or 35-foot buses are usually made by different makers. We use our buses, we use All Nova, and the issue is we don't have a lot of time with doing all different types of different services with different parts. The other issue is we have certain times of the day that we're, prior to COVID, we have capacity issues even with the 40-foot bus. To arrange change offs through the day is a resource issue, as far as we're going to put buses on, then we're going to take them off. It gets to be very complex as we go along. So and for us, the 40-foot buses are actually built to withstand a lot of elements, a lot of road conditions. The 35-foot buses or the 30-foot buses actually work harder even with the same engine or with a smaller engine. And they don't actually, some of the turns we have to make in the city are actually easier because of where the steering tires are in a 40-foot bus, are actually easier to make those turns than it is in a 35-foot bus, because the steers are in front of the driver. There's there's definitely pros and cons optically, but at the end of the day, one series type of bus that will handle capacity at certain times of the day, especially for school in the morning, school in the afternoon, won't work with the smaller bus, and that's why we always choose the 40-foot bus.
Councillor Burbank?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to hear about the electric buses and looking forward to seeing them coming to Stratford. I had a couple of questions about shelters, and they're actually from citizens. One of them is a concern about not enough shelters. So I did look at the stats, at least the ones I found. I think we have 20% of stops have shelters now at this point. So the question was, are we planning to accelerate the number of shelters so that we have more coverage? So that's question one. And then question two is, how are the locations for the shelters selected?
Okay, through the chair, through question one, my intent is always to add shelters every year. Through this program that I talked to about ISIP, there's funding for that. I usually do approximately $130,000 to $150,000 a year through this program, so it doesn't cost the taxpayers any money, which gives us about 12 to 14 shelters, depending on the amount of concrete work. It's usually the concrete work that costs the most, because I'm trying to make it as accessible as possible. Sometimes I have to join a sidewalk, or I have to perform a cutout. So some concrete pours at some of these pads are a little bit more expensive, but basically almost every year in the last 7 years, I've been putting in shelters, and in hopes to have a lot more. And you're correct, it's about 20% of bus stops now have shelters, and accessible ones. I'm also going to revisit the ones that have been out there for a very long time, the smaller 4x8 ones. There's some out there that are 25 to 30 years old. They need some work, and I would consider some of those not very accessible. So once I get new shelters in very popular spots, I'm going to start revisiting and updating the old ones as well over time. As far as how they're selected, we have a lot of really interesting data now that through the GPS, through the Monday to Friday service with the Constat system, and the on-demand service on the weekend, we now all capture doors open, doors closed, requests by customers from on-demand. We get heat maps as far as where the most popular stops are. And that's now how we kind of base our decision as far as where we're going to put a bus shelter is based on popularity. So it's become very electronic, which is what I was looking for all the time. It's kind of hard to put out to the residents kind of polling as far as where a bus shelter would be. My hopes are to get a lot more bus shelters every year going forward. But basically, that's how we pick shelters now, is we have this electronic data, and it's actually very accurate and very good to use in making decisions like this, not alone shelters, but how routes are performed as well. So it's great information.
That's great, thank you. I did have one more question about benches too. So do we continually add benches or to stops that don't have a shelter? Or do we have any idea how many of those we have?
Through the chair, benches, not very many. We'll put some park benches in certain areas. The trouble is sometimes we might have to ask for permission to put a bench on someone's property. A lot of our bus stops are there's really not a lot of municipal lands that we use. Like as in the bus shelters this year, I've had to go to five landowners, because the bus stop was popular, but there wasn't enough room on municipal property to put a bus shelter. So I've had to put it on the other side and get their permission. And I've never had any pushback as far as landowners denying that type of request. So sometimes shelters, even though it might be a popular stop, is not the best. I don't have room to put a bus shelter, and I could move the bus stop, but then it just becomes more of a walk for somewhere else. So sometimes a bus shelter won't necessarily go where I want to because of the amount of real estate I have to work with.
Great, thanks very much. And I think it's great that we're collecting all that additional data. I think that will really help in the route planning and planning the shelters. So that's great. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you. Councillor Henderson?
And when I was out driving the other day, I was noticing, like, we've been starting to buy the CRP plastic benches when we do construction projects in the city, and I think they're running around $500. I'm not sure. I think it depends on the length, whether you get 4, 5, or 6. But and I was thinking about that, and I thought, and you never have to paint them or do anything with them, right? And I was wondering how much it costs for us to put the benches in the shelter. And I'm assuming they're a lot smaller than the benches. You know, I was just trying to think of, you know, if we could order benches separate. And I'm not sure actually if CRP plastic could make the benches without the arms on them. You know, they redesigned the Market Square accessibility cities tables for us because they weren't really accessible for people to pull their chair under and to actually be able to eat at the table. So they redesigned that and they worked out great. So I was thinking about, I don't know what the benches cost when they come as part of the shelter compared to, say, maybe getting the wooden benches or plastic benches from CRP Plastic. Have we ever thought about looking at that? Because I know there's some shelters that don't have any. I know the one on my street here, like off my street on St. Vincent Street, down towards Lorne Ave there, it doesn't have a bench in it or near it. And I think there was plans for one to go there when they did construction on the street. But for some reason, whether it was the property owner didn't want it, I don't know why it never got there. They did the one up further by the school because there was supposed to be 2 benches on that street. So that's sort of a whole bunch of things I'm talking about there. But
Through the chair, we've never visited plastic benches, only because there's certain specifications. They have to be bolted to, to the concrete. They have to be, sturdy enough. We've actually taken out the middle piece in the last 3 installs. So it's just a straight bench now. So it's much more accessible. And over time, I'm slowly replacing, even in the older shelters, the benches that had that arm piece in the middle. So I'm working on getting rid of those over time. Of course, it takes some time. It takes resources. It takes funding opportunities like this to just really start working on these things. But there is something I will be bringing, and I've brought this to council or subcommittee before, and that was I am pursuing a bench program that I will be bringing back to council, which is just a bench that would most likely not fit a shelter because of its location, but at least we can put a bench there. So that's we're looking at that future too. So, but the bench that's designed by the shelter manufacturers, there's certain specs and weights, and it needs to be anchored down into the concrete pad. So that's we haven't looked at it before. We've always gone with the standard bench. Now that we take the center arm piece out, we find that that's actually been doing the tricks.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mosley. Are there any other questions for Mr. Mosley? Okay, if not, there's a staff recommendation that the management report titled Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program be received for information, and that staff provide updates on various projects status when required for the remainder of the funding stream. Do I have a mover for that? Councilor Burback? Okay. Is that a question, Councilor Henderson, or were you moving as well?
I couldn't remember if we needed a seconder or not.
Okay, thank you. Okay, all in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. Item number 5 is a department update. Director of Community Services, Mr. St. Louis.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Just to compliment the report that's in the package, In terms of Parks Capital, that playground is being installed as we speak and should probably be complete in the next week or so. As you look at the transit numbers, we are still below what we've currently had in the last year, and certainly lower than we've had in the previous year. And hopefully when school starts and schools open, that our numbers will increase again, slowly, maybe getting back to the way we were. Again, same as in parallel transit, ridership is 55% of normal, and we see as things start to open up, we will hopefully see those numbers increase. In terms of programming, pool is open and is active. Summer camp is going well, and senior program has started a daytime program at the Agriplex. We have now operating an arena at the Rotary Complex, and we have isolated its own entrance and exit to keep it separated from the vaccination clinic and the testing center. A request from HPBH that we try and keep things separate, and it seems to be going well. The weight room upstairs is also using a separate entrance, with the washrooms being open up top. Unfortunately, because of the lack of use of the elevator, the walking track remains closed at this time. And that's all I have. I'm open to questions.
Thank you. Councillor Clifford?
Yeah, I was just going to ask on the vaccine center for the health unit. Quite a few places have already closed them. Is there any talk about how long it's going to continue with vaccination at the Rotary?
Yeah, through the chair, there is talk, but at this point, they still plan on using the Rotary Complex at least until the end of August, but there should be some updates after that. You'll notice now that they're starting to do drop-in clinics, and that they're going to start doing some mobile clinics also.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, my other question, I have my house beside the volleyball thing here at night. And I noticed the other night it was almost, I don't know why I was up at midnight, but I was. And like the lights were still on. And I just wondered, I suspect it's on a timer like it is at the tennis court, but is there a time that it, like for noise and whatnot, is there a time it should go off? Or I'm just curious about it. I was quite surprised that my backyard was set up at 12 midnight.
Yeah, they're supposed to be on timers, so I check on if there's a malfunction, and normally they go off around 11. So I'll look into that.
Councillor Burbank?
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick question about Memorial Garden. So I think I remember if it was 2 meetings ago that we had discussed possibly fixing, there's a small step that goes into Memorial Gardens, and we were looking at fixing it for accessibility. It came up at the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and I just happened to be having lunch the other day right at the restaurant right next to it. And I did witness an elderly gentleman actually tripped over the step and fell. Thankfully, he seemed to be okay, but it just reminded me that that's one of the things that we were looking at correcting. So I'm just wondering how that's coming along.
Yeah, through the chair. Sorry, I don't have an answer to that. I'll have to check with Parks, but I know it's on our list for correction, and it should be done within the next month.
Great. Are there any other questions for Director? Okay. Item number 6, there are advisory committee and outside board minutes for your information. And our item 7, our next subcommittee meeting is Thursday, September 16th at 3:30, and is a motion to adjourn. Councillor Clifford, all in favor? It's carried. Thank you, everybody.